The illusion of control that Moscow has long projected is collapsing under the weight of numbers it can no longer hide. For months, the Kremlin has claimed stability on the front, but newly leaked documents from within Russia's own defense ministry tell a very different story. The data obtained by Ukraine's intelligence-backed project I Want to Live and verified by several Western analysts reveal that between January and September 2025, Russia suffered a staggering 550 casualties, including 86 sutsurs, 4 dead. These are not foreign estimates or propaganda figures. They are Russian state records, and they expose the full horror of a war that has consumed the country's most vulnerable citizens. The spreadsheet released in late September outlines in cold, bureaucratic detail how Russia's war machine has devoured its people. Losses include 1,583 officers, 33 966 missing in action, and over 158,000 wounded. The report also accounts for 1,145 pieces of destroyed equipment, from tanks and infantry fighting vehicles to radar systems and missile launchers, assets that once symbolized the Kremlin's military pride. These figures confirm what observers have long suspected: behind the facade of televised victories, the Russian army is bleeding out. What makes this revelation particularly striking is not just the scale of the losses, but who bears them. Analysts from BBC Russian and Mediazona have traced more than half of all confirmed Russian deaths to the poorest and most remote regions, Buryatia, Tuva, Dagestan, and Yakutia areas, populated largely by ethnic minorities and working-class families. In contrast, Moscow and St. Petersburg remain largely untouched, their urban elites spared from the mobilization drive. This pattern, evident since 2022, now amounts to a form of internal colonialism the periphery pays for the center's ambitions. The leaked data confirm that this war at its core is not only geopolitical, it is profoundly social. The injustice is staggering. In Buryatia, a republic of barely 1 million people, local cemeteries have doubled in size since the first mobilization wave. According to estimates by Novaya Gazeta Europe, the death rate per capita there is over 10 times higher than in Moscow. Mothers in Dagestan speak of entire villages emptied of young men while new mobilization notices keep arriving. Yet in Russia's capital, the cafes are still full, and government ministers insist that the special operation is proceeding according to plan. It is a plan built on the suffering of those who have no voice. This divide between the insulated metropolises and the exploited margins has become one of the defining characteristics of modern Russia. The Kremlin's silence about the unequal human toll is deafening. Instead of acknowledging the burden borne by its poorest citizens, state media continues to broadcast sanitized footage of parades and flag ceremonies, pretending that patriotic fervor outweighs grief. It is this appalling silence, as one Moscow sociologist told Reuters, that has begun to rot the moral fabric of the nation. From a political perspective, the leak has sent shockwaves through Russia's tightly controlled information ecosystem. The I Want to Live initiative's posts on X, formerly Twitter, have been shared millions of times despite the Kremlin's attempts to scrub them from domestic platforms. For the first time since the war began, Russians are seeing their government's own handwriting columns of numbers, showing dead sons, missing brothers, and vanished fathers. This is not Ukrainian propaganda. It is Russian truth. Western intelligence officials confirm that these internal figures align closely with estimates from the British Ministry of Defense, which in June warned that total Russian casualties had surpassed 1 million. What's new is the precision and the unmistakable implication that Moscow itself can no longer control the narrative. The war that was meant to demonstrate Russia's revival has instead laid bare the fractures of a state built on secrecy and sacrifice. Behind the columns of figures lies a nation unraveling. Each number in that spreadsheet is a name, a life erased, a family broken. And yet the Kremlin continues to call for discipline and endurance. The question now is not whether the truth will spread, it already has, but how long the regime can survive the weight of its own lies. Numbers can feel cold and distant, but these figures are a window into the human cost of Moscow's war. The leaked documents show not just the total losses, but the shocking rhythm of death that has become normalized. On average, Russia loses 35,193 soldiers and 7,700 pieces of equipment every month, the equivalent of an entire brigade erased from existence. Each day, nearly 500 men are killed or go missing according to the internal reports. That's one battalion a day gone forever. For a country that prides itself on its military heritage, these statistics are more than just grim, they are unsustainable. The I Want to Live team noted how these losses include both active combat troops and reserve forces drawn from Russia's poorest regions. Analysts at Defense News and The Economist have since corroborated the scale of these losses, estimating that 2025 alone has been the bloodiest year yet. Entire units have been rotated through Ukraine's Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia sectors, only to be annihilated within weeks. What began as a special operation has devolved into an industrial slaughter. The brutality of this system stems from a strategy that values numbers over life. Reports from captured Russian soldiers published by the Kyiv Independent describe how conscripts are thrown into Storm Z assault units, disposable formations, ordered to advance across open fields with minimal training and almost no artillery support. Many are armed with nothing more than rifles from the 1970s and a few magazines of ammunition. Their purpose, commanders admit off the record, is not to win ground, but to absorb Ukrainian fire so that better equipped units can follow. It is the modern version of human wave tactics, and it has made death routine. Socially, the burden falls hardest on Russia's margins. In towns across Dagestan and Taiva, recruitment officers have targeted families dependent on state subsidies, offering cash incentives in exchange for a signature. For them, war is a job, not a choice. A Dagestani human rights lawyer told Al Jazeera, "They send their sons because there is nothing else left to sell." The Kremlin's so-called voluntary contracts are anything but voluntary, when poverty and intimidation leave no real alternative. It is the poorest who pay the richest man's price. The inequality deepens as the war drags on. While casualty notifications pour into rural post offices, Moscow's youth are shielded by connections and exemptions. Reports from Meduza and BBC Russian indicate that affluent families continue to bribe military commissions to keep their sons at home. The result is a grotesque inversion of justice. The people least responsible for the war bear nearly all of its human cost. In Buryatia, one activist calculated that every third street in her village now has a dead soldier. Meanwhile, government officials in Moscow receive medals for patriotic contribution. Even Russian military doctors, speaking anonymously to Novaya Gazeta Europe, have begun describing the frontline evacuation crisis. They say that wounded soldiers are often left on the battlefield for hours or days because of broken logistics and inadequate medical vehicles. The leaked data confirm this horror. For every soldier killed, only 1.3 are successfully evacuated alive. In modern warfare, such a ratio is catastrophic. It points to a system that either cannot or will not save its own men. Politically, these numbers are not just statistics, they are potential catalysts for unrest. Small telegram channels run by soldiers' wives and mothers have begun reposting casualty updates from I Want to Live despite censorship laws. These networks are fragile but growing, creating what political analysts at the Atlantic Council call soft resistance, a moral challenge to the Kremlin's monopoly on truth. The state can silence politicians, but it cannot easily jail grieving mothers. The leaked figures also highlight the scale of equipment destruction. Over 13,000 vehicles have been lost beyond repair, and nearly 50,000 more are awaiting restoration. Western intelligence reports from Military Watch magazine suggest that Russia's armored vehicle fleet has been reduced by almost 40% compared to pre-war levels. Even if Moscow rebuilds, the quality gap is widening. Many replacements are decades-old tanks, pulled from storage lacking modern protection systems. Each destroyed vehicle represents not just financial loss, but eroded morale, a visible sign of decay. Every metric in the leaked document, casualties, missing personnel, destroyed vehicles, tells the same story: a war spiraling beyond control. The Kremlin once boasted that its special operation would take days. Now it measures its progress in corpses. Behind the numbers lies a nation bleeding quietly, while its leaders pretend not to hear the sound. As the death toll rises, the Kremlin has turned to an increasingly desperate strategy to replenish its ranks. Russia's recruitment machine, once fueled by patriotic zeal, now runs on coercion, fear, and economic despair. In 2025, Ukraine's intelligence agency GUR reported that Moscow had already conscripted around 280,000 new soldiers, nearly identical to the total number of casualties recorded in the same period. That grim symmetry reveals the essence of Putin's strategy: replace the dead with the living and call it victory. Recruitment drives have transformed from propaganda campaigns into survival operations. According to Reuters and BBC monitoring, regional governors are under direct pressure from Moscow to deliver quotas, often bribing or threatening local officials to meet targets. In Siberia's poorest towns like Ulan-Ude or Kyzyl, young men are cornered at job centers or bus stations, handed a contract, and promised bonuses of up to 2 million rubles. But what they don't know or can't refuse is that many never return home. Prisons, too, have become recruitment grounds. The Kremlin's deal with the Wagner Group in 2022 set the precedent, but after the mercenary rebellion and Yevgeny Prigozhin's mysterious death, the Defense Ministry absorbed those tactics directly. The Moscow Times revealed in early 2025 that Russia's Ministry of Defense had formalized a program to enlist convicts, murderers, rapists, and drug traffickers under frontline rehabilitation contracts. Once their service ends, if they survive, their criminal records are wiped clean. It's a chilling bargain that underlines how far the regime has sunk to sustain its war. Beyond the prisons, coercion extends to migrants and minorities. Reports from Radio Free Europe and The Guardian show how Central Asian workers from Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan have been forced to sign military contracts under threat of deportation or fabricated criminal charges. Many were construction laborers or street cleaners who barely spoke Russian, yet found themselves in Donetsk trenches within weeks. Some were promised fast-track citizenship only for their families to receive death certificates instead. For the Kremlin, they are the perfect soldiers, expendable, invisible, and far from Moscow's outrage. This system feeds on inequality. Ethnic Russians from major cities continue to evade the front lines, while non-Slavic regions shoulder the majority of casualties. Analysts from Carnegie Endowment note that this pattern, what they call selective mobilization, has effectively turned Russia's periphery into a human reservoir for Moscow's wars. It is colonial exploitation disguised as patriotism. The mothers of Buryatia have a term for it now: the tax of blood. Politically, this mobilization machine also exposes cracks in Kremlin control. Telegram channels run by soldiers' wives have begun documenting cases of men coerced into signing voluntary contracts. One widely shared post from the soldiers' mothers of St. Petersburg showed messages from Dagestani conscripts who were beaten for refusing to deploy. Despite censorship, these accounts circulate quietly through encrypted apps and local networks, creating an undercurrent of discontent that the regime can neither fully silence nor punish. The financial cost of this mobilization is staggering. Economist Janis Kluge estimates that the average cost to recruit a contract soldier rose from 1.5 million rubles in January to nearly 2.5 million rubles by September 2025. This alone consumes roughly 0.5% of Russia's GDP, not counting salaries, pensions, and death compensations. For context, that's more than the annual education budget of several Russian regions combined. Putin's government insists it can sustain this pace, but the math says otherwise. Even with these incentives, enlistment fatigue is setting in. Reports from Meduza and ISW indicate growing resistance to new mobilization waves. In some regions, officials falsify recruitment data to avoid punishment, while draft centers struggle to find men under 40 who are medically fit for service. The demographic pool is shrinking fast, a reality that no propaganda can reverse. Underneath the patriotic slogans, "This is a war devouring its own future." Every conscript drawn from a poor village or prison cell represents not strength, but desperation. The Kremlin may boast about replacing losses with new recruits, yet it is merely recycling tragedy. As one soldier from the 110th Brigade told the Kiev Independent before defecting, "We are not the army of Russia. We are its ghosts." The human tragedy unfolding in Ukraine is mirrored by an economic one inside Russia. Behind the facade of patriotic defiance, the war is eroding the country's financial foundations at a rate unseen since the collapse of the Soviet Union. Every new soldier and every destroyed tank represents not just another life or machine lost, but another strain on a collapsing budget. Russia's mobilization model and economy of attrition has become an economic death spiral. According to recent analyses from Reuters and Bloomberg Economics, the cost of maintaining the war effort in 2025 exceeded $160 billion, a figure that includes recruitment bonuses, compensation payments, and equipment replacement. At current spending rates, that's more than Russia's entire pre-war education and healthcare budgets combined. The Kremlin's financial planners insist that the budget can bear it, but even their own projections leaked last month by the Moscow Times show a 9% defense overspend above target. For a country under heavy sanctions, this imbalance is catastrophic. The war economy has distorted everything. Factories once producing civilian goods now manufacture drones and ammunition. The Ministry of Industry recently admitted that 37% of all state contracts in 2025 were for defense-related production. It's a number that may seem impressive on paper, but it also means fewer resources for schools, hospitals, and local infrastructure. As one economist told BBC News, Russia is fighting a 21st century war with a Soviet-era economy, and that economy is cracking. The Kremlin's recruitment policy has worsened this crisis by stripping the labor market of its youth. With hundreds of thousands drafted or dead, critical sectors like construction, logistics, and IT are facing historic shortages. A Forbes Russia report from August noted that the country's construction sector has lost 17% of its workforce since 2022, while major logistics hubs like Novorossiysk and Murmansk are unable to fill basic technical positions. To plug the gaps, regional governors have tried importing more migrant labor, ironically, the same populations the military is coercing into service. The result is a labor paradox that feeds its own failure. The social fallout is visible in every province. Inflation has climbed back above 9%, and food prices in rural regions are rising even faster. Pensioners queue longer for medication, while the ruble, battered by sanctions and falling oil revenues, has slid past 120 to the US dollar for the first time since early 2022. Moscow's attempt to offset the blow with war-related bonuses has merely deepened inequality. Those near the defense sector benefit, while teachers, doctors, and small business owners are pushed toward poverty. The demographic perspective makes the outlook even bleaker. Russia's working-age population, already shrinking before the war, is collapsing under the twin pressures of death and emigration. The Financial Times reported that nearly 900,000 people, mostly skilled professionals, have fled Russia since 2022, forming a shadow exodus of IT experts, engineers, and researchers. Many now work in Armenia, Kazakhstan, or the EU, accelerating what demographers call a brain drain spiral. Each year of war compounds this loss, leaving Russia not just poorer, but intellectually hollowed out. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, Ukraine's drone warfare has dealt a devastating blow to Russia's energy backbone. Al Jazeera and Defense News confirm that Ukrainian long-range strikes in mid-2025 destroyed or disabled at least 11 major oil refineries and several fuel depots deep inside Russian territory. This has triggered cascading shortages across central regions, with motorists in Tatarstan and Ryazan waiting hours for rationed fuel. Some gas stations have closed entirely. Energy, once Moscow's financial lifeline, is now becoming a liability. Even within the Kremlin, quiet alarm is growing. In a closed-door meeting leaked to the insider, Finance Minister Anton Silwanov reportedly warned that maintaining 2025's war spending would force cuts to domestic programs and drive the economy into recession by mid-2026. Putin's proposed fix-cutting defense expenditure slightly below 2025 levels was symbolic rather than substantive, meant to reassure markets, but not to restore solvency. The truth is undeniable: the war's costs are rising faster than Russia can replace what it burns. For a nation that measures power through endurance, economic exhaustion is a quiet but fatal enemy. Russia may continue to conscript, recruit, and rebuild, but it does so at the expense of its own survival. The ruble may still trade, the factories may still hum, but the foundation beneath them, human and economic capital, is eroding. And unlike propaganda, numbers cannot lie forever. As the economic foundations tremble, the psychological ones are beginning to collapse. Inside Russia's military machine, morale has reached its lowest point since the invasion began. The leaked documents from the I Want to Live project show not only staggering losses, but also the slow corrosion of faith among those still fighting. What was once sold to soldiers as a patriotic duty has devolved into a desperate struggle for survival, one that few now believe in. Across multiple fronts, testimonies from Russian defectors and intercepted communications reveal an army haunted by exhaustion and fear. The Institute for the Study of War, ISW, reports that entire platoons have refused orders in the Donetsk and Kupiansk sectors, citing unacceptable losses and no tactical sense in repeated assaults. Some commanders have resorted to executing deserters publicly to restore discipline, a throwback to Soviet-era brutality. But fear no longer motivates. It only corrodes. As one intercepted Russian officer lamented to The Guardian, "They call it courage, but it's only the courage to die." The most telling indicator of collapse comes not from the front, but from the home front. Across provincial Russia, a quiet rebellion is taking root, led not by politicians, but by women. Mothers and wives of conscripts have begun organizing vigils, sharing casualty lists, and confronting local officials about the fate of their sons. According to BBC News, Russian, and Novaya Gazeta Europe, these gatherings, though small, have appeared in more than 40 regions. They are not political rallies, they are funerals without coffins. Yet their moral weight is immense. This movement has become what analysts call soft resistance. Women armed only with photographs and grief are forcing local governors to acknowledge what Moscow tries to bury. Telegram channels such as Put Domoy, The Way Home, and Zhenshchini Rossiya, Women of Russia, have gained thousands of followers despite threats from the FSB. When police disperse their protests, they regroup online. As one activist in Omsk told Radio Free Europe, We do not speak of politics. We speak of our children. That is something even the Kremlin cannot censor. Politically, this form of dissent is more dangerous to the Kremlin than overt opposition. It erodes legitimacy not through ideology, but through empathy. These women are not dissidents. They are mothers of the regime's own soldiers. Their grief spreads faster than propaganda can suppress. Even in tightly controlled regions like Chelyabinsk, local officials now hold private meetings with soldiers' families to prevent public outrage. This containment strategy, according to an internal report leaked to Medusa, shows that the Kremlin views sorrow itself as a potential act of defiance. At the same time, within the army, the sense of futility is turning into self-destruction. Reports from the Kiev Independent detail a disturbing trend: Russian soldiers intentionally injuring themselves to escape the front lines. Some shoot themselves in the leg or hand. Others surrender deliberately, preferring Ukrainian captivity to Russian command. Military psychologists interviewed by Deutsche Welle describe a phenomenon they call collective collapse, the point at which units stop functioning, not because of lack of ammunition, but because they no longer believe in victory. From a demographic standpoint, this collapse of morale carries lasting scars. Every broken soldier, every traumatized veteran returning home adds to the long-term erosion of Russia's social stability. Psychiatric clinics in regions like Krasnoyarsk and Bashkortostan have reported a 60% increase in PTSD cases among returning servicemen in 2025, according to Kommersant. Many return addicted to alcohol or painkillers, some violent toward their families. The war has already begun bleeding back into Russia's streets. Meanwhile, the Kremlin's propaganda apparatus continues to broadcast triumphalist narratives: new gains, strategic stabilization, heroic operations, but the gap between narrative and reality widens daily. Soldiers in the field now mock these broadcasts, calling them the fairy tales of Channel 1. As one survivor of the 51st Army wrote anonymously to Medusa, they say we are liberators. But we can't even liberate ourselves from this nightmare. The comparison to the Soviet collapse grows harder to ignore. Just as Afghanistan in the 1980s became the quagmire that drained the USSR's morale and economy, Ukraine is doing the same to Putin's Russia. The difference is that today every soldier carries a smartphone, and with it, the power to record the truth. Videos of abandoned units, destroyed convoys, and mass graves leak daily to Telegram and Western media, eroding the myth of an invincible Russian army. The Kremlin can censor the news, but not grief. It can threaten journalists, but not silence mothers. It can bury numbers, but not ghosts. The war that began as an assertion of control is becoming the very force that unravels it, one broken soldier, one mourning mother, one empty village at a time. As 2025 draws to a close, Russia finds itself facing a reckoning that extends far beyond the battlefield. The leaked intelligence confirming over 1 million casualties, killed, wounded, or missing marks not just a military catastrophe, but a national trauma whose consequences will echo for generations. For the Kremlin, which built its legitimacy on promises of strength and renewal, these numbers are more than statistics. They are the arithmetic of collapse. From a demographic perspective, the implications are staggering. According to Rosstat data analyzed by The Economist, Russia has already lost more than 1.2 million working-age men since 2022, either dead, wounded, or permanently displaced. The population of young men aged 20 to 35 has shrunk by nearly 15%, accelerating a demographic decline that was already one of the steepest in the industrialized world. In regions like Buryatia and Dagestan, entire cohorts have been decimated, leaving behind widows, orphans, and communities stripped of their future workforce. Economists warn that this demographic crater will cripple Russia's productivity for decades. Meanwhile, the country's intellectual class continues to flee. More than 900,000 professionals, engineers, programmers, scientists have left since the full-scale invasion began, according to Forbes Russia. Their departure is not just an economic loss. It represents a brain migration that erodes the foundations of modern Russia. The future these people could have built, technological innovation, healthcare reform, sustainable industries, is now being built elsewhere in Tbilisi, Yerevan, Warsaw, and Berlin. Inside Russia, the vacuum grows deeper. Socially, the imbalance between the protected elite and the exploited periphery has reached breaking point. Moscow and St. Petersburg, shielded by privilege and influence, continue to host glittering galas and sporting events, even as coffins from Buryatia, Tuva, and Dagestan fill rural train stations. This moral dissonance is becoming impossible to ignore. As one Dagestani teacher told The Guardian, they fight for Moscow's pride, but Moscow does not even know their names. It is this quiet injustice, a war fought by the poor for the ambitions of the rich, that now defines Putin's Russia. The political cost is beginning to surface. The soft pressure from soldiers' families has evolved into a persistent moral opposition that no authoritarian mechanism can fully extinguish. Local governors, terrified of unrest, have begun quietly lobbying Moscow for fewer mobilization quotas, while state media outlets are under new orders to avoid casualty reporting altogether. But the internet remains a porous frontier. Telegram channels and foreign-based news outlets keep pushing the truth into Russian homes pixel by pixel until even loyalists can no longer look away. Donald Trump's renewed presidency in Washington has complicated the international dimension of this reckoning. While the U.S. administration in 2025 maintains a less interventionist tone toward Ukraine, European nations, particularly Poland, Germany, and the Baltic states, have doubled their support. Ukraine's Western-backed drone industry has turned Russia's energy sector into a liability, striking oil depots, refineries, and command centers hundreds of miles from the front. These precision attacks are more than symbolic. They undermine Moscow's claim of control and reinforce a psychological truth: Russia's war is no longer winnable. Inside the Kremlin, the mood is defensive and fatalistic. Putin, according to insiders quoted by the Moscow Times, has shifted from talking about victory to emphasizing historical endurance. But endurance is not infinite. With recruitment costs soaring, sanctions tightening, and the social fabric fraying, the regime faces a convergence of crises that propaganda cannot mask. The facade of unity held together by fear and television now strains under the weight of empty villages and grieving mothers. Demographers warn that the war's true cost will be felt not today, but in 20 or 30 years, when the missing generation, those who should have been workers, innovators, and fathers, simply does not exist. The double bleeding of manpower and intellect has created what analysts call a generational vacuum, a gap so wide that even peace, when it comes, cannot refill it. The Kremlin may yet suppress dissent and recruit replacements, but it cannot summon back the dead or the departed. The tragedy of this war is not just that so many Russians died, it's that they died for a vision that no longer exists. The imperial dream has consumed the nation that dreamed it. What remains is a country haunted by silence, mothers waiting for sons who will never return, factories missing workers who will never come home, and a president clinging to power over an army of ghosts. Russia may claim victory on paper, but history will remember the truth revealed in those leaked documents, a truth measured not in territory gained, but in lives erased. And when the final reckoning comes, it will not be decided by the Kremlin's words, but by its losses. The leaked intelligence exposing Russia's true casualty numbers in Ukraine has torn through the Kremlin's narrative like a blade through glass. Behind official lies of strategic progress lies a nation drowning in its own blood, over 1 million soldiers dead or wounded, most from impoverished regions and ethnic minorities. The I Want to Live documents show how Moscow has sacrificed its periphery to protect its privileged core, turning the war into a social and moral reckoning. Politically, the revelations have ignited a fragile network of defiance led by soldiers' mothers, while economically, the spiraling costs of recruitment and lost labor are hollowing out the state from within. Demographically, the damage is irreversible. A generation of youth erased, an intellectual class scattered, and a future mortgaged to war. As 2025 ends under Donald Trump's renewed presidency, Russia's empire of silence is breaking. The world no longer measures its power by parades or propaganda, but by the empty villages and cold graves stretching from Buryatia to Bryansk. History's verdict is already written. This war will not end in triumph, but in truth, and that truth is a death toll too vast for even Putin to